Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely wild. We're going to look at why MC5 started a revolution and how the gritty, blue-collar environment of Detroit essentially birthed punk rock as we know it. Let's get right into it.
To really understand the MC5, you have to root yourself completely in the working-class reality of 1960s Detroit. I mean, this was a city built entirely around the assembly line. If you're a young guy coming out of high school in Detroit's disused industrial downriver suburbs back then, your options were pretty stark. College? Not really on the table for most. You either went to work on the line at a massive complex like the Ford Rouge plant, or maybe you found a tool and die shop and just hoped you didn't lose too many fingers by the time you retired. Or, well, you found a radical way out. For the guys in MC5, their escape route was taking all that mechanical, industrial noise and twisting it into something completely unprecedented.
Now, at this exact same time, there's a massive cultural divide happening in Detroit. On one side, you have Motown. Motown was a total pop juggernaut, famously calling itself the sound of young America. It was polished, it was unifying, and it was doing this incredible job of bringing black and white audiences together with these universally appealing love songs. But you know, that slick, manufactured pop, that just wasn't the sound of the disaffected working-class white kids living out in the industrial fringes. Out of all their boredom and frustration brewed this raw, angry, incredibly high-energy proto-punk noise from the MC5 and their sort of little brother band, the Stooges. They were creating a sound that was the complete polar opposite of those feel-good Motown hits.
But to actually brew that kind of noise, they needed a laboratory. Enter the Grande Ballroom. Originally, this place was built in 1928 as a Moorish-style dance hall where couples went to do the foxtrot. But by the 60s, it had fallen into total neglect. That is, until a local DJ named Russ Gibb took a trip out to San Francisco, saw those massive, sprawling rock halls, and decided, hey, I'm bringing this to Detroit. He takes over the Grande in 1966, and overnight, it becomes the city's premier counterculture haven. Gibb had one major rule. Bands had to play their own original material, absolutely no cover bands allowed. The MC5 quickly became the anchor there, playing constantly. It was essentially a petri dish where their aggressive, high-energy music could mutate and grow in front of these fanatic local crowds.
Outside the walls of the Grande Ballroom, though, Detroit was reaching a very real boiling point. In 1967, the idyllic facade of the prosperous Motor City was completely shattered by a devastating 5-day riot. It was sparked by long-standing racial tensions and aggressive policing in the inner city, and the toll was deeply tragic, resulting in 43 deaths. This historic event acted as a massive catalyst for radicalizing the city's youth. The music coming out of Detroit couldn't just be about love and dancing anymore. The reality on the streets was quite literally a war zone, and the MC5 absorbed all of that chaotic, violent energy straight into their worldview.
So the crucial takeaway here is how directly this impacted the band. They didn't just watch the riots on the evening news. They lived right smack in the middle of the riot zone. Guitarist Wayne Kramer famously talked about the sheer surreal terror of walking out his front door and seeing a literal U.S. Army tank pointing its gun right at his house. The band found themselves facing intense militarized police oppression. At one point, they even had their door busted down by police who falsely claimed they were snipers. You can imagine that constant, heavy-handed pressure pushed the MC5 from being just another loud rock band into becoming highly motivated political revolutionaries. They wanted to tear the establishment down and start over.
But, even amidst all this heavy political radicalization, they were still basically a group of young guys just trying to make music. In fact, their absolute most iconic song, Kick Out the Jams, has incredibly humble origins. The band had moved into a communal living space in downtown Detroit, which happened to be a second-floor former dentist's office. They actually lined the downstairs storefront with egg crates so they could have a 24-hour rehearsal studio. The song itself was literally born around a kitchen table. Kramer and singer Rob Tyner would sit there with a tiny amp and a couple joints, just cobbling together guitar riffs until they accidentally crafted a track that would change hard rock forever.
Now today, Kick Out the Jams is recognized as a legendary rock anthem. But the crazy thing is, it actually started out as an insult. See, the MC5 used to open for these heavily hyped touring bands coming through Detroit. And when those bands got on stage and ended up being super low energy or just plain disappointing, the MC5 guys would literally yell from the crowd, "Kick out the jams or get off the stage, motherfucker." It was this brutal, unfiltered demand for authenticity. One day it clicked that this was actually the perfect title for a song, perfectly summing up their zero-tolerance policy for fake rock and roll.
From there, things just moved at an absolutely breakneck speed. Check out this timeline. After the riots radicalized them in '67, by October '68, they're recording a massive live album at the Grande Ballroom. Early '69, the Kick Out the Jams album drops and immediately causes nationwide controversy. And then bam, just months later in July 1969, their manager John Sinclair gets arrested. When you look at how rapidly all these events stacked up, you really get a sense of the chaos of the era. The MC5 were strapped to a rocket ship of cultural upheaval, and honestly, it was only a matter of time before the engines gave out.
A huge driver of that cultural upheaval was their manager, John Sinclair. He was this massive, almost guru-like figure for the band. Sinclair actually formed the White Panther Party in solidarity with the Black Panthers, and they published a manifesto with a highly provocative three-point program. It called for a total assault on the culture by any means necessary, specifically utilizing rock and roll, dope, and fucking in the streets. It was this wild blend of serious anti-establishment political theory and complete acid-fueled absurdity. Naturally, the authorities viewed this as a direct threat, which put a massive target right on the band's back.
But before the authorities could fully catch up with them, the band managed to capture lightning in a bottle. They took the mechanical, primitive roar of Detroit's mass production machinery and channeled it straight into their guitars. They were so ferocious and brought so much energy live that when they finally signed with Elektra Records, they made the unprecedented decision to record their debut album entirely live at the Grande Ballroom. You just didn't do that for a debut record back then. But really, it was the only way to genuinely capture the sheer beast of their performance, a sound that directly mirrored the heavy industrial machinery they grew up surrounded by.
However, signing with a major corporate label brought immediate disaster. The band had recorded an uncensored version of Kick Out the Jams and a separate clean version for the radio. While Elektra sees the single taking off and decides to just rush out the uncensored album. Kids take it home, parents hear the obscenity, and boom, massive nationwide outrage. Elektra panics and actually presses an unauthorized clean version behind the band's back. The band was furious. When local record stores refused to stock them, the MC5 retaliated by taking out a newspaper ad full of graphic street language bashing the stores. And the kicker? They sent the bill for that ad directly to Elektra. That was the final straw. Elektra fired them. But it showed the band's absolute refusal to compromise their street-level authenticity, even if it literally torpedoed their career.
The fatal blow to the band, though, ultimately came from the state. Authorities had been waiting for the perfect moment to crack down on the counterculture, and they finally found their opening. Their manager, John Sinclair, was set up by an undercover agent. He was handed a 10-year prison sentence. 10 years! And for what? For possessing just 2 joints of marijuana. It was a tragic turning point. It completely removed the band's visionary leader at the exact moment they desperately needed guidance to survive the mainstream music industry. Without Sinclair steering the ship, the band was left adrift, and their incredible momentum just stalled completely.
Now, while the original members have all sadly passed away, their musical legacy is just undeniable. Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine totally hit the nail on the head when he inducted them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, saying they basically invented punk rock. Their hyper-fast, aggressive sound, that fierce anti-establishment ethos, and all that working-class anger laid the absolute foundation for massive bands like The Clash and the Ramones that would pop up years later. The MC5 stripped away all the flowery finery of the 1960s pop scene and delivered something deeply primal and profoundly influential.
So, what does this all mean for us today? It leaves us with a fascinating question about legacy. Back in 1969, when John Sinclair was locked up and Elektra dropped the band, it really looked like the establishment had won. But then you look at the entire landscape of punk, hard rock, and heavy metal that followed, and their DNA is literally everywhere. So did MC5's revolution actually fail in 1969, or were they just so far ahead of the curve that it took a full decade for the rest of the world to finally catch up? It's incredible to think about how a few kids messing around in a Detroit dentist's office kicked out the jams and accidentally changed music history forever. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.